What would you do if the person you loved most was found in the last place you ever expected? It's a question no one ever imagines facing, a nightmare you don't wake up from. And for one young woman, that nightmare began the moment she stepped into her own backyard, expecting peace but finding horror instead. A discovery so shocking, so unnatural, that it sent shockwaves through the entire neighborhood and left investigators scrambling for answers. Because behind one fence on one ordinary suburban lot, something unthinkable had unfolded. This story begins not with a scream, but with silence. A silence that hung over the house like a warning no one could see. A silence so heavy that even the birds seemed to avoid the yard that day. The daughter, known for her calm routine, her predictable schedule, returned home expecting nothing more than a normal afternoon. She set her bag down, opened the back door, and stepped out onto the familiar concrete steps she had walked countless times. But this time was different. The air felt wrong, and still, heavy, unsettled. She noticed the overturned flower pot first, a detail so small it meant nothing on its own. But then came the second detail, then the third, and slowly the ordinary backyard she grew up in felt like foreign territory, a place touched by something she couldn't yet name. And then she saw it, a shape where no shape should be, a stillness that didn't match the wind, and in that instant, one terrible, unforgettable instant, her world collapsed. Because the figure lying there wasn't a stranger, wasn't an intruder, wasn't some unknown shadow from the night. It was her mother, a woman she had spoken to hours earlier, a woman who had been cooking, laughing, planning the week ahead. A woman who should have been safe inside the house, not concealed in the yard behind it. Panic hit her in a violent way. She called for help, her voice cracking, echoing off the backyard walls. Within minutes, neighbors peeked through blinds, police cars rolled in, and the quiet street transformed into a crime scene drenched in blue and red lights. But even as officers stormed into the yard and cordoned off the area, one terrifying question hovered over everyone standing there. Who could do something like this? Nothing about the scene made sense. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of a break-in, no strange vehicles reported. No screams heard by the neighbors. It was as if the crime had taken place in a vacuum, silent, deliberate, and chillingly precise. Investigators began their work immediately, but the deeper they looked, the more unsettling the situation became. This wasn't a random act. This wasn't impulsive. Whoever was responsible had moved with intention, with purpose, with knowledge of the home and its routines, and that realization changed the direction of the investigation instantly. If the killer knew the house, if they knew the layout, if they understood when someone would be home and when they wouldn't, then this wasn't just a murder, it was personal. Detectives sat with the daughter, their questions gentle but urgent. They asked about family tensions, about recent arguments, about strangers hanging around the property, but she kept shaking her head, unable to understand how any of this could be real. Her mother had no enemies, no deaths, no dangerous history, no signs of fear. So why here? Why her? Why now? As the sun began to set behind the patrol cars, casting long, eerie shadows across the backyard, the investigators made a chilling observation. The killer had taken a tremendous risk to carry out this crime. A risk that suggested a powerful motive, something hidden, something buried, something no one had expected. And the daughter, sitting on the edge of the porch with trembling hands and tear-streaked cheeks, suddenly realized something even worse. If the killer had been in the backyard, if they had known the house, if they had known her mother's routine, then there was a chance, just a chance, that they might have been watching her too, watching her come and go, watching her walk through the yard, watching her every day, waiting for the right time. The neighborhood lights flickered on one by one, illuminating a street that would never again feel ordinary. Because now everyone wondered the same terrifying thing. If a killer could walk into a backyard in broad daylight, if they could leave without being seen, if they could take a life so quietly, then what else were they willing to do? And where were they now? Before the tragedy that would shake the entire neighborhood, life in the household seemed normal, quiet, predictable. The victim, amnesitic, a 48-year-old mother, was known for her warm smile and the way she always greeted neighbors with a quick nod and a friendly word. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. She lived simply, kept to herself, and focused her energy on her daughter, Hera, who was in her early 20s. To most people, they were just a small family trying to find stability in an unpredictable world. Amna worked part-time at a local tailor shop. She wasn't the kind of person who made headlines or caused trouble. Her coworkers described her as patient, soft-spoken, and remarkably strong, someone who had survived more than she ever talked about. She had her burdens, her quiet struggles, but she carried them silently, the way many mothers do. Her life revolved around routine: morning tea, work shifts, evening cooking, and late-night conversations with her daughter about school, plans, and dreams. But beneath that routine, something was shifting, ever so slightly. Hira had noticed it first. The way her mother paused at the kitchen window for just a second longer than usual, the way she double-checked the back door at night, the way she seemed distracted, almost as if listening for something or someone. When Hira asked, Amna simply brushed it off, saying she was tired, overworked, or just thinking about bills. But the truth was hidden in the silent moments. Those quiet seconds when Amna's eyes drifted to the backyard with a look that wasn't fear, but caution. Something had changed. And yet no one outside the family sensed anything unusual. Neighbors saw the usual routine: Amna sweeping the porch in the morning, watering her plants in the afternoon, and hanging clothes on the line behind the house. But what they didn't see was how often she looked over her shoulder, how jumpy she had become at the sound of footsteps, how she avoided going out after sunset, even for the smallest errands. There were hints, subtle ones, that something was wrong. But hints are easy to overlook when life seems ordinary on the surface. The home itself carried an odd, unspoken history. It had belonged to Amna's parents before her, and although it wasn't in perfect condition, it held memories she wasn't ready to leave behind. Some of those memories were comforting, others not so much. Old family tensions, long-buried disputes, unfinished matters that no one talked about openly. Yet none of it seemed dangerous, not enough to imagine what was coming. Still, the past has a way of resurfacing when least expected. And sometimes the truth hides in the places we trust the most. Hira and her mother had grown closer in the months leading up to the tragedy. They spent evenings watching old dramas, sharing light jokes, cooking new recipes they found online. But even during those warm, peaceful moments, the atmosphere never felt completely steady. There was a restlessness to Amna, a hesitation in her laughter, a strange alertness in her eyes. It was as if she was waiting for something, or fearing something. One night, Hira remembered hearing soft footsteps in the backyard. They weren't heavy enough to be alarming, but they sounded close. She told her mother, who froze for a moment before giving a forced smile and saying it was probably cats or strayed dogs. The explanation sounded reasonable, but the expression on Amna's face said something else entirely. A week later, she started locking the doors earlier. She began bringing plants inside instead of leaving them outside overnight. Little changes that didn't seem important at the time, yet would later feel like warnings. Warnings no one recognized. Life continued. Days passed quietly. The town moved through its usual pace: school traffic, shop openings, evening strolls, power outages, street vendors calling customers. Everything appeared normal, but in the background of that normalcy, a shadow had already entered their world, quietly, patiently, unseen. And Amna, intuitive, cautious, and protective, may have sensed it before anyone else. What she didn't know was that whatever was coming wasn't coming from outside. It was already too close. So close that by the time the first true sign appeared, it was already too late. Long before the tragedy unfolded in the backyard, small things had already begun to shift inside the household, changes so subtle they were easy to dismiss. But looking back, every one of those moments carried a warning, and every warning pointed to something dark moving closer, inch by inch, a la inch. It began with the sounds: late-night rustling outside the windows, soft footsteps on gravel when no one was supposed to be outside. At first, Hira assumed it was stray animals, the same cats that roamed the neighborhood at night. But these sounds felt different. They were slow, deliberate, pausing just long enough to make her wonder if someone was standing there, listening. She mentioned it once to her mother during breakfast. Amna stopped stirring her tea, just for a second. Her eyes flicked toward the back door before she forced a smile and said, "That's nothing. Don't overthink it." But the way her hand trembled slightly as she lifted the cup told another story. A week later, a second incident happened. Hira came home from evening classes and noticed the back gate slightly open. It wasn't broken, just pushed out of place, as if someone had slipped through and forgotten to close it properly. She didn't think much of it at the time. Gates move in the wind, locks loosen, small things happen. But when she told her mother she watched Amna subtly glance toward the backyard again, the same fearful flicker in her expression. This time, she locked the gate herself twice. Then there were the missing items. Nothing valuable, nothing alarming, just odd. A gardening glove gone from the porch, a trowel missing from the shed, a small planter that seemed to have been moved an inch or two from where it had always been placed. Things too small to report, but too strange to ignore completely. Hira noticed them, of course, but her mother noticed them more. And every time she found something out of place, she would quietly fix it without explaining why it bothered her so much. Sometimes discomfort doesn't show up as fear. Sometimes it shows up as silence. There was one night, 2 weeks before everything unraveled, when Hira walked into the living room and found her mother sitting in the dark. No TV on, no phone in her hand. Just sitting there, staring at the window. Amna blinked as if pulled back from somewhere far away. "Yes," she whispered. "I'm fine. Go to sleep." But she didn't get up from the couch. She stayed there until dawn. Then came the phone calls. Unknown numbers ringing twice, then hanging up. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes late at night. Always silent when answered. When answered. Hira thought it was spam or wrong numbers. But Amna started turning her phone on silent, placing it face down, and jumping whenever it vibrated. When Hira asked who kept calling, her mother replied, "Just mistakes," but her voice said otherwise. There was something she didn't want to discuss. Odds this were something she hoped would disappear if she ignored it. It didn't. A few days later, Hira overheard her mother speaking in hushed tones on the phone, her voice tense, low, almost pleading. She couldn't hear the exact words, but she caught one fragmented sentence before Amna noticed her and ended the call abruptly. "I told you not to come here again." Those words stuck with her. Fear is a way of convincing people to keep quiet, so she didn't ask, she didn't push. She convinced herself that every family has issues, every adult has a past, every mother has things she keeps to herself. But the universe has a cruel way of repeating warnings until someone pays attention. One evening while watering the plants outside, Hira felt it, an unmistakable sensation that someone was watching her. She turned quickly, scanning the street, the windows, the fences. Everything looked normal, empty, still. But the feeling stayed, sharp, heavy, unshakable. She told her mother immediately, and Amna, instead of brushing it off like before, locked the back door, closed the curtains, and said a single sentence that chilled Hira to the bone. A stay inside for a few days, just until things settle. But nothing settled. The nights grew quieter. The house felt heavier. The sense of being watched followed them from room to room, and the smallest noises made both of them turn their heads at the exact same time. The red flags were everywhere, tiny, disjointed pieces of a puzzle neither of them understood yet. A moved object, a silent call, a shadow where none should be, the fear they couldn't name. None of these moments seemed big enough to be danger on their own, but together they painted a chilling picture, a picture that would become painfully clear very soon. Because all those little signs, all those warnings, they meant only one thing, but this was only the beginning. The evening began ordinary. Dusk settled. Lights came on. Tea brewed. Plates were set. Routine held the house together. But routine can be deceiving. Small slips become openings. Quiet habits become vulnerabilities. Earlier that day, a window had been left ajar. A small oversight. Amna noticed, closed it, and said nothing. Hira felt the shift. They carried on. Outside, someone watched, patient, quiet, calculating. They mapped the house. They learned the rhythms. When Hira left, when Amna stayed, when doors were careless. A plan waits for a place to move. That night, the power flickered. Darkness blinked across the block. In that brief blackout, movement can hide. Gates can be eased open. Footsteps can cross yards without notice. Someone used that blink. A figure slipped along fences. Soft steps on gravel. The backyard gate opened like an unguarded secret and closed behind them. The house hummed, unaware. Inside, the radio murmured. The kettle clicked. Ordinary noises. The intruder moved with a calm that felt practiced. No chaos. No shouting, just purpose. They checked the back door. It was unlocked as expected. A whisper of a push. The latch gave. They entered. They walked by memory, avoided the creaking board, moved through the shadow between the porch light and the kitchen. They paused, listened, heard the clatter of a spoon. The familiar rhythm of a home kept them patient. Then chance shifted everything. Hira stepped into the yard to retrieve a plate. Her back faced the house. For a heartbeat, the line between safety and danger thinned. The intruder closed the gap, Eins the gap. A struggle broke the quiet, sharp, swift. The intruder acted with an efficiency that allowed no long cries. He returned and saw her mother. Panic tore out of her. She screamed. Noise sparked the neighborhood awake. Lights flared. A dog barked. The intruder moved faster, urgency replacing calm. They grabbed what they needed. They attempted to erase traces. Their hands were steady. Their decisions were immediate. Hira lunged for the door. Her fingers found the handle. Her legs burned. She could hear steps on the path, not toward her, away, or maybe both. Seconds stretched like hours. The intruder pushed through the gate. The latch clicked. Footsteps faded. The night reclaimed them. Neighbors huddled at windows. Phones dialed. Blue lights arrived. Blue lights arrived. The backyard that had held quiet afternoons now held chaos. Then the realization sank in. This had not been random. It had been planned. Someone had watched them long enough to know when the house was vulnerable. Someone had known the routine and used it. Questions came like bullets. How had they learned the schedule? Who had the nerve to come so close? Which routine offered the opening? Hira sat on the porch, breath ragged, hands trembling. She could feel how close danger had been. Too close. Familiar. Detectives would later call it methodical, cold, deliberate. They would trace steps and motives piece by piece, but in that first hour, there was only shock and the uneasy knowledge that a private life had been invaded. Outside, under a street lamp, the intruder walked away like any passerby, ordinary, unremarkable, invisible to people who had not been paying attention. Inside, the family's small rituals lay scattered. A life that had felt safe now felt porous. Someone had slipped through their days, and until then, no one had known. The crime was finished. The aftermath had begun. Earlier hints threaded through the weeks, phones that rang with no voice, a gate nudged open at odd hours, a glove missing from the porch. Small disturbances that, in isolation, felt trivial. Together, they formed a rhythm, a cadence the intruder had used to measure the right night. When the intruder left, they left nothing loud. They left a pause that sounded louder than any shout. Hira's cries echoed long after the figure disappeared down the lane. She would later replay that pause in her head. The instant before the door closed, the way a single decision cut through their ordinary life. Those minutes would become the backbone of every question to come. What happened in the moments that followed would become the most talked about, most replayed, and most disturbing part of the entire case. It was the moment when the intruder's quiet patience shifted into calculated violence, and Amna's final minutes unfolded in chilling silence. Investigators would later determine that the intruder had entered the house with a level of confidence that suggested familiarity. They didn't fumble. They didn't hesitate. They moved as though they had walked through that door before, maybe once, maybe many times. Inside, the air felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. As Amna cleared the dinner table, she sensed something. An instinctive tightening in her chest, a flicker of fear she couldn't trace. She paused, listened, but heard nothing. She took one step toward the kitchen. Then she froze. A shadow shifted near the hallway, small, quick, almost impossible to catch unless someone was already on edge. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. The intruder stepped into view, not rushing, not panicking, just appearing as though they had been waiting for her to finally look. Amna's voice broke into a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." Those words would haunt the investigation. They hinted at recognition, at history, at secrets no one had been told. What happened next unfolded quickly, too quickly for her to escape, too deliberately for it to be accidental. The intruder forced her toward the backyard, using the quietest path through the house. They kept her close, kept her silent, as if determined to finish what they had come for without alerting anyone. Neighbors later reported hearing a single thud, short, soft, followed by nothing. Not a scream, not a call for help, just silence. Detectives believed the intruder chose the backyard because it was hidden behind tall walls, shielded by the angle of the house, and partially blocked from neighboring windows. A place where the night could swallow anything that happened within it. Once outside, the intruder acted with purpose. They moved Amna toward the far corner of the yard, the one place that remained completely dark when the porch light flickered during the earlier blackout. They avoided the patches of gravel that crunched. They avoided the side that faced the neighbor's dog. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't impulsive rage. It was a plan being executed step by controlled step. The struggle that followed was desperate but brief. Amna fought back. Investigators found evidence of that later, but she was outmatched, overpowered. forced into stillness. And then, in a moment that detectives described as a disturbingly precise, the intruder carried out the final act of the crime. It was quick, efficient, horrifically decisive. No hesitation, no remorse. Just a cold, unbroken continuation of the intruder's objective. When the investigation team processed the scene, several things stood out immediately. There were no footprints leading in from the front, no signs of climbing, no broken locks, no disturbed plants or knocked over furniture. The intruder had moved like a ghost, leaving almost nothing behind. Almost fine. In one corner of the yard, just inches from where Amna fell, detectives found something that changed the direction of the case entirely. A small scrap of fabric caught on a nail. Dark, tightly woven, and torn with force. Not from Amna's clothing, not from anything in the house. Something the intruder didn't intend to leave. The rest of the backyard told the story in fragments. An overturned bucket, disturbed soil near the garden's edge, a faint trail showing the direction the intruder moved as they departed. Each mark was subtle, but together they revealed a chilling truth. The killer hadn't panicked after the act. They stayed long enough to look around, to check for witnesses, to make sure the scene was how they wanted it. That level of composure horrified investigators, and the detail that shook them even more. They believed the intruder watched Amna for weeks, studied her, chose a night when the power flickered, chose a moment when the yard was darkest, chose the exact path to move through the house without a sound. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a crime of intention. Codes, no. And when the intruder slipped out of the yard, sliding through the gate without leaving so much as a scuff on the wood, they vanished into the night as silently as they had arrived. No witnesses, no cameras, no trace beyond that scrap of fabric. By the time Hira discovered her mother later that afternoon, the intruder was long gone, calm, unnoticed, and confident they had erased their presence. But they hadn't erased everything. One mistake, one tiny torn scrap, one clue that whispered a terrifying possibility: the killer wasn't a stranger. They were someone who knew the family closely enough to walk into their world without fear, and that realization would turn the entire investigation on its head. The aftermath began with chaos, sirens, neighbors gathering in clusters, officers flooding the narrow street. But beneath the noise lay a strange, unsettling quiet. A quiet that came from the realization that someone had entered this home, executed a calculated crime, and disappeared without a trace. Detectives from the Regional Homicide Unit arrived within the hour, quickly taking over the scene. They worked methodically, sectioning off the yard, photographing every angle, collecting anything that seemed out of place. But the intruder had been careful, too careful. The backyard looked untouched, as though nothing had happened there at all. Still, investigators trusted patterns, and patterns always begin with the smallest details. The first breakthrough came from the scrap of fabric found near the nail on the garden wall. Dark, tightly woven, torn with force. It wasn't much, but it was enough to suggest clothing worn by someone used to manual work, someone who spent time outdoors, someone who didn't mind getting dirty. Detectives logged it, bagged it, and continued searching. Inside the house, nothing seemed stolen. There was no sign of forced entry. No drawers opened, no valuables touched. The only disturbance was a faint trail leading from the hallway to the backyard, a pattern of pressure on the floor that suggested two people moving with urgency. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Over the next 48 hours, police interviewed every neighbor, shop owner, and passerby on the street. Most said they saw nothing suspicious, but one neighbor, a retired teacher who lived across the lane, mentioned seeing a man standing near the house 2 nights earlier. He wasn't close, but he seemed to be waiting, watching. When the neighbor approached, the man walked away quickly. He described the figure as unfamiliar, though he couldn't place why. That detail mattered, because familiarity meant connection, and connection meant motive. Detectives then turned their attention to the phone calls Amna had been receiving. Silent rings, abrupt hang-ups, numbers that traced back to unregistered prepaid SIM cards. But one pattern stood out, one particular number that called at predictable intervals, always at the same time of day. And when forensic technicians cross-referenced tower data, they found something chilling. The phone making those calls had pinged from a location less than 200 meters from the house. Over and over again. Someone had been lingering near the home for weeks. The investigation shifted sharply Oh yeah. Detectives built a list of individuals who knew the family, anyone from Amna's past, anyone who may have had unresolved issues with her. That list led them to a name, someone Amna once distanced herself from, someone who had shown unpredictable behavior in the past. A relative by marriage, known to be unstable, known to disappear for weeks at a time, known for sudden anger and vindictive grudges. He became the prime suspect. Surveillance teams tracked him down to a rented room on the edge of the city. When officers arrived, they found him calm, too calm, as if the investigation didn't concern him. But in his small apartment, they found clothes with fabric matching the torn scrap from the crime scene. They found a pair of shoes with soil consistent with the backyard. And most importantly, they found a phone with call logs matching the silent numbers Amna had received. The suspect didn't deny being near the house. He didn't deny watching it. He simply said, "I wanted to talk to her." But the evidence said more than he ever did. He was arrested on the spot. The trial began 4 months later. Courtrooms filled. News channels covered every hearing. Hira sat through every session, her face still pale from the weight of what she had survived. Prosecutors built their case piece by piece: motive, opportunity, surveillance patterns, phone records, fabric analysis, behavioral history. They argued that the suspect had become obsessed, convinced himself he had been wronged, and felt entitled to confront Amna in a way that turned deadly. The defense tried to argue lack of intent. Heat of the moment, they claimed. A terrible accident. But the planning was too precise, the pattern too deliberate, the escape too controlled. When the suspect took the stand, his expression remained blank, detached, as if none of this, the evidence, the grief, the accusations, applied to him. Even in the courtroom, his face showed no regret, no confusion, no fear, just emptiness. It took the jury less than 3 hours to return a verdict: guilty. As the sentence was read aloud, the suspect didn't blink, didn't react, didn't speak, but Hira did. She exhaled, a long, trembling breath that held months of fear loss, and the final realization that the person who shattered her life had once been close enough to walk into their world without suspicion. The courtroom emptied. Reporters filed out. The suspect was led away. But the shadows of what happened lingered, because even with the case closed, one truth remained: monsters don't always come from outside the home. Sometimes they come from the people we already know. In the end, when every piece of evidence had been collected, every statement recorded, and every secret dragged into the harsh light of the courtroom, one truth remained impossible to ignore. This crime was never an accident. It was the final result of a twisted plan, built on lies, manipulation, and an obsession with control that spiraled far beyond anything anyone around them could have imagined. And even after everything was exposed, even after the jury delivered its final verdict, people were left with a chilling question: how could someone walk such a dark path and show so little humanity? As the community tried to return to normal life, the shadow of the crime lingered. Neighbors still whispered when passing the crime scene, unable to erase the memory of police lights flashing across the quiet street. Parents held their children a little closer. Friends checked on each other more often. Because everyone had realized something frightening: evil doesn't always announce its arrival. Sometimes it grows silently, hidden behind familiar faces and polite smiles. The victim's family fought to rebuild their broken world. Their nights were filled with questions no one could ever answer. Why didn't we see it coming? Could we have stopped it? These thoughts haunted them for months, replaying again and again like a film they never asked to watch. Yet, despite the unbearable grief, they kept pushing forward, determined that the victim would be remembered not for the way their life ended, but for the way they lived it, with kindness, with warmth, and with a heart that touched the people around them. Meanwhile, the criminal sat behind bars, silent and emotionless as the world outside tried to understand the motive. Reporters attempted to deeper, psychologists analyzed every behavior, and investigators revisited every detail looking for a crack in the story. But the suspect never offered an explanation. No apology, no regret, no moment of reflection, just a cold stare, as if the weight of their choices meant nothing. Even in the courtroom, as the final sentence was read aloud, their face remained still, an unsettling reminder that some minds remain forever hidden. The detectives who worked the case admitted it was one of the most disturbing investigations of their careers. The evidence told a story more twisted than anything they expected. The planning, the deception, the quiet steps that led to the violent end. And what frightened them most wasn't the brutality of the act, but how close the criminal came to getting away with it. One small mistake, one overlooked detail. That's all it took to unravel the entire scheme. A reminder that even the most carefully constructed lies eventually collapse. As the case officially closed, the town tried to move forward. But stories like this don't fade easily. They stay alive in memory and conversations in the quiet moments when someone wonders how well they really know the people around them. And that's what makes this story so unsettling. The realization that darkness can exist in the most ordinary places, hidden behind a mask no one thinks to question. So what do you think? Could someone like this truly be born with a darkness inside them? Or is it something that grows quietly over time, shaped by hidden thoughts, painful memories, or secret desires? Was this crime inevitable, or could a single decision made differently have changed everything? I want to know your thoughts. Drop your opinion in the comments. Tell me what you believe created the monster in this story. Your perspective might help someone else see this case in a completely new age. If you found this story gripping, chilling, or thought-provoking, make sure to like the video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next deep dive into the darkest corners of true crime. Because the truth is, there are many more stories out there. And some of them are even more disturbing than this one.